is Misha, and this is part 2 in our look at the AK. And part 1 was a look at the Soviet era rifles, as well as exact clones or copies, such as made in that video by Poland and a few others. In this video, we're going to take a look at less exact copies, more variants widespread. And obviously, we're not going to be able to hit up every single variant, not even close, because there are dozens and dozens of different variants out there. But we'll give it a go, hit up some of them, and we'll begin with the Polish. In 1957, Poland began to manufacture the AK-47 Type 3 with a milled receiver. Again, please refer to our original video for information on the base guns these came off of. And it was referred to as the KBK WZ 1960, or sometimes the PMK. Now the version I'm holding here is a different variant. This is one for grenade launching, known as the KBG WZ 1960. And we have a shooting video on this, but in that video it's set up like a regular rifle. Here we've got it with all the grenade launcher accoutrement with it. At the muzzle we have a screw-on launcher. Here we have the gas cutoff. This is the opposition. This is gas on for regular fire. This is off for shooting grenades. We have the grenade sight here, which clamps on. This is the early machined or milled style. Later they would go to a stamped style. Typical smooth top cover, typical milled receiver. This milled receiver is actually an Arsenal receiver, but it's a good Type 3 type receiver. We have a lock back here to keep the dust cover on while firing rifle grenades. And we have this rubber boot that fits on to the stock using these two holes, so when you fire it, it doesn't wallop you. And these are used with short 10-round blank firing magazines similar to this one here. This sling on it is an early Polish style sling. Has leather up here. Just a little bit different from the Russian style. I think these look neat, and it's kind of nice because they don't scuff up your sling swivel. And just for fun, here is a rifle grenade for it. And that's what it looks like when it would be ready to launch. But anyway, Poland would manufacture these through the 60s, and they would pretty much have the KBK version and the KBG version. They would also do a quick detaching stock version, which is incredibly rare. They didn't make very many of them, and they used the same stock, but they had a different tang, and they had two spring-loaded buttons you could press to pull the stock off completely. It would still leave two shorter tangs in the back, so that's kind of an interesting sub-variant, but they did make these. The Polish milled guns are probably best known for the Century Arms M60 or an M1960s that they did for a while. They're out of production now, but it's actually probably one of the best Century products to ever be made. They were on ATM American receivers, and they had Green Mountain correct profile AK-47 type barrels. Most were of the standard version, but they did actually make a small batch of the grenade launching version as well. This one here is an SSR 99P, which Gordon Tech did under Arsenal contract around 2000, 2002, somewhere in that early era. So there's a few of these out there. The Polish guns are well known for great quality and a smooth operation, and just really a nice example of one of the first countries to make a licensed production copy of the AK-47 Type 3, even though they put a few twists of their own on it. Oh, one other twist I didn't mention, as you can see, the sling swivel is actually on the buttstock as opposed to side of the receiver. Some of the Polish guns would have it on the rear here, some would have it on the stock, so just differences in how they manufactured them. And if you look back at our first video, you'll see the Polish underfolder. In 1966, Poland would make a licensed production copy of the AKM as the PMKM, And in 1972, they would have an underfolding version called the PMKMS, and that was actually the one featured in our first video, but both are pretty much exact copies of the Soviet pattern. So they would switch to the stamped 7.62x39 guns. Move on. Okay, next up is a gun that's rather famous. This is the Polish WZ-88 Tantal. Well, after Russia adopted the AK-74 and 5.45x39, many other Warsaw Pact nations followed in the early 80s. Poland was no exception. They started testing in around 1982, and it took them all the way until 1988 to finally perfect the design. The ironic part is, just a year or two later, communism started to fall all across East Europe, so the Tantal was in service a very brief period of time. But it is a uniquely Polish gun. It's not really an AK-74 except in the caliber. We have a 16-inch barrel, but what's interesting is we have 14mm threads here. They're all the way back here in front of the sight base, and the barrel actually runs out to here. So this is all barrel under here. So your front sight is actually further back. That's why there's less of a gap here than on other AK-74 type guns. But we have a combination flash hider grenade launcher muzzle brake unit. It's got a grenade ring here. Bayonet lug is here. Bayonet lug is here, or accessory lug. We have a thinner cleaning rod. This is actually not interchangeable with the standard AK-74 cleaning rod for some reason. We have a lug here for the bipod. The handguards are interesting. There's this lever here. You can flip 180 degrees and the handguards come right off. So you can actually remove the handguards without disassembling the gun, which is kind of a first for a lot of Kalashnikovs. This upper handguard is made of a somewhat soft plastic for good heat tolerance. The lower handguard is made from a fiberglass material, commonly called Bakelite, but it's not exactly Bakelite. Same stuff the mags are made out of. Rear sight's pretty standard for an AK-74. Bolt carrier is again pretty standard. This one has the rib top cover. Others did have the smooth. They used both patterns. It has the same kind of locking device on the back, just like the grenade launching version you just saw. Standard stamped receiver. Interestingly, on the military guns, this was your safety, standard on an AK. But this side, there's a second switch, which is actually your fire mode selector. It would go single, 3-round, full auto. Now this is of course just a dummy one. It's just here for the look and for the movement. But on the military gun, this would be how you would select your fire. On some semi-automatic versions, especially those made by Century, they linked this to the safety on the right side to try to make an ambidextrous or left side safety, but it doesn't really work because you don't get enough mechanical leverage there to really move that, so it's not really very effective. We got a late style Polish sling here. We have this crutch style folding stock, very common to most AK fans. Get around here. This one's stiff. It's just that style. This was originally made in, this style was originally made in East Germany, and it was copied by many others, including Poland and Romania, and Egypt would make a different kind of a copy. They would copy the mechanism, but not the stock itself. Originally, these were made with 30-round metal mags. Later, these polymer 30-round mags would be made for them. But yeah, the Tantal just wasn't in service long. It was adopted in 1988, went into service in 1989, and by the late 90s, they were already starting to phase these out. That's when we saw so many kits hit the country at about 2005 to 2010. Again, these were made most famous by the Century Tantals, and there's a lot about those. They at first used the wrong twist rate or the wrong board I mentioned, so that kind of gave the Tantal a bad name. This one here is built with an original Polish barrel and works just fine. And the Century guns worked, it's just, they sometimes keyhole. Something to keep in mind there, though, is not all 5.45 bullets are the exact same weight. So one bullet type might work well in a 1 in 8 twist, whereas another one works better with a 1 in 10. It just kind of depends on if you're firing Russian, Bulgarian, Romanian, etc. projectiles. So I'm not excusing what Century did. They definitely goofed, but it is something to keep in mind that not all 5.45 bullets are equal as well. Yeah, the Tantal is definitely an interesting gun. And it is it's an AK-74 type gun, but it's really very different. Again, it has different muzzle devices, the way it's set up. So a lot of the parts, including the upper handguard and the muzzle device, do not interchange with standard AK-74s. But it does take standard AK-74 mags. Well, from the Tantal actually was derived one of my favorite guns. And this has been in several videos, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because I don't want to bore you. But this is the Polish Radom WZ-96 Beryl, or the Archer semi-automatic version thereof. This actually has a lot in common with the Tantal. Well, after the Tantal was in 5.45 and in Poland was no longer affiliated with the Warsaw Pact, in 1991 they rechambered the Tantal for 5.56 223 and named it the WZ-91. This was for mostly commercial export sales. Not many were sold, but it did prove that they could rework the design to fire the NATO standard cartridge. And that led to the Beryl. This actually has the same handguard set up here. It has the same lever, so the handguards come off. The gas block is the same. It has the lug for the bipod. Now there's no cleaning rod under the barrel on a Beryl. The front sight is similar, but since they didn't use that real long flash hider and everything on this, they used a small muzzle brake, they were actually able to get away with going to an 18-inch barrel, which is really the optimum length for 5.56 NATO, which this is chambered for. So that's why the Archer, the Beryl, is known for really good accuracy, that and just really good fit and finish. We have the same type of rear sight as on the Tantal. Of course, we have this scope rail mount. It locks in the back here with this quick throw lever to take it off, and it has two locking points in the front, here and here. It kind of forks into these grooves. And it's just a standard Picatinny rail. This is a Gen 4 rail that's lighter and improved from the previous generations. It has a safety on the side. Now this is a late production style Beryl, sometimes called the WZ 2004. They improved the design after lessons learned in the first couple of years of being over at Iraq. One of them is they put the shelf on the safety to make it easier to reach. Another is they put this extended enlarged mag release here, larger oval. Another is they made the selector have two arms as opposed to one on the Tantal. And this is just like on that Tantal, it's just a dummy selector, but it would do the same fire mode, full, 3, semi. And whereas the original Beryl had a Galil style side folding stock, the later versions like this one have a 4-position AR style stock. It's not interchangeable, it has a thinner arm here, but it's that style. And it has this nice large rubber boot, which is good for either full auto fire or if you still want to launch rifle grenades. This rifle is capable of that. It has a grenade ring up here on the muzzle brake, so it can still launch light rifle grenades. It feeds from kind of modified Tantal type mags. This is the late translucent style. Early on, they were black. They looked just like the Tantal polymers, except they were marked 5.56. Intermediate, they were clear, but those were known for cracking. And so they went to this translucent style, which has a stronger material made. They're just polymer mags. They don't really have metal reinforcements, but they are good mags. They also make a M16 magwell adapter for these. Well, we have several videos on this, so I don't want to harp on it. I will say that IO Royal Tiger is no longer importing the Archer. Looking at serial numbers, 700 came into the country. And this is getting on towards the fall of 2016, and there's still nothing from Radom USA, so I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not. I hope it does, but I'm getting worried that maybe something has gone wrong and it will not. So there is a chance that only 700 of these semi-automatic Beryls may be in the USA. So if you find one for a good price and have been wanting one, I strongly suggest you pick it up. It's a fantastic rifle, accurate, reliable, and has a lot of modern features. So it's a really, really good gun. And you definitely can see the lineage of the Tantal. It is still an AK. The operating system is still the exact same long stroke 2-lug system that's always been used, but it's just made with really good tolerances, fit and finish, and it's a really nice gun. And this is still current issue in Poland today. I know they've been talking about the MSBS, but actually they just purchased several thousand more Beryls, so who knows if they're actually going to go with the MSBS or keep on using the EAK drive Beryl. We'll move on. Another relatively early adopter of the AK-47 was Hungary. In 1959 through about 1962-1963, they produced what they called the AK-55, which was an exact copy, more or less, of the AK-47 Type 3. It would be made with beechwood, but otherwise it looked the same as the Soviet version. It is featured in one of our other videos, the one on Russian guns, so if you would like to look at it, check that out. After that, they would adopt a stamped receiver version known as the AKM-63, and that's in our Hungarian AK video as well. And it was essentially a standard AKM, except it had a skeletonized handguard and a vertical pistol grip. It had a 16-inch barrel and a fixed beechwood buttstock. And that was a standard issue for a time. In 1966, the AMD-65, which I'm holding here, went into production. And the AMD-65 is a carbine version of the AKM-63. We still have the skeletonized handguards here, exposed gas tube in this. We have a shorter 12-inch barrel with the front sight. It's a separate piece, but it's very close to the gas block. We also have a large muzzle brake. Since this is a semi-automatic version, it has a 2-inch extension here to make it 16 inches overall and thus legal. But the military version looked just like this, except this piece here missing. The early AMD-65s had the same wooden pistol grip, front and back, as the AKM-63. And then later ones are ones that went in for replacement grips would be given these kind of soft, malleable polymer plastic grips, which are superior. They're more comfortable and they don't break as easily and so on and so forth, which was good because these carbines were issued to tank crews, special forces, police, people who would be banging them in and out of things a lot. So these are often issued with 20-round mags like this. This is a Hungarian 20-rounder. The gas system is nearly full length, but it's actually just a little bit shorter than normal. So the gas piston is just a little bit shorter. We have a side folding wire stock. It's very sturdy. It doesn't have any play to it at all, especially on this one here. Now this rifle is one that Tennessee Guns, TGI, sold. It is on an FEG receiver with an FEG barrel and everything else. Everything is FEG on it except the trigger group, which is Tapco. It's kind of neat because these sold for very cheap at one time. And they're really interesting, good guns. They're not long range and they're not super accurate, but they are very lightweight and they have a very interesting look. It's kind of a love it or hate it type deal. But the AMD-65 was in production in Hungary for, about 15 years. They went out of production in 1980. But they stayed in use, and they're still in use today as far as I know. I think some are even still being used over in Afghanistan and other places. But this is one of the earliest short carbines. Remember, this will predate the AKS-74 Ukrink by over nearly 15 years. So for its time, it was one of the shortest and lightest AK variants ever produced. It still fires the standard 7.62x39 cartridge, of course, because that was what was in use at the time in the 60s. And it is really just an interesting gun. Aside from the TGI ones like this one, which have an FEG receiver and barrel, Century Arms made an AMD-65 Sporter with a US receiver and US barrel. And these are easy to tell apart because instead of having a 12-inch barrel with an extension and the muzzle brake, they'll have a 14-inch barrel, so longer out to about here, and then the same muzzle brake permanently attached. There's been some other kit builds as well from different companies. You will see some fake AMD 63s built from AMD 65 kits, but these are usually easy to tell apart because for one thing they won't have the original Hungarian beech wood stock in the back, and they'll have the slightly shorter AMD 65 gas system. So kind of be mindful of that. There were enough differences between the 63 and the 65. For example, this doesn't have a bayonet lug, whereas the 63 would. Also, the 63 just had a standard muzzle nut, not this big brake. But not a wholly practical gun for the modern shooter, but it is very interesting, and at one time you could get these very authentic Hungarian type guns for very cheap. So this is definitely one of the more major AK variants floating around out there. Now another one here, and this is making its debut. This hasn't been featured in a video yet. This is a Hungarian FEG SA85M, and this is a semi-automatic version that was imported back in the 80s. In 1977, Hungary and FEG kind of revamped the line, and they went to a more modern and easier to mass produce version. What they did, they took the AK-M63 and they put standard handguards on it, and they put a slant compensator on it like most AKMs would have. And they offered it either with a standard fixed buttstock or an underfolding stock. It became known as the AK-63F if it had a fixed stock, or AK-63D if it had an underfolding stock, and it was built on a standard stamped receiver. Interestingly, it has a few holdovers from the original AK-55 or AK-47, these being the non-lightning cut bolt, the smooth handguards without palm swells that are a little bit thicker, a ported gas tube instead of gas block, but it will still take the standard AKM bayonet. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The front ferrule here for the handguard's a little bit different from standard too. It's more rounded, so it's a little bit of a unique part there. The underfolding stock is very standard. Has a Hungarian type wood pistol grip like you'd see on the AK-M63. But yeah, this was what kind of replaced the AK-M63 and some of the AMD 65s beginning in the late 70s, and are still officially in production, or at least being serviced in Hungary today. These are still in active use. But this was kind of their standard AKM type rifle. Back in the 80s, about 7,000 of these SA85Ms were imported. I think about 3,000 fixed stocked and 4,000 underfolders, if memory serves right. But they are definitely a very high quality gun. You know, factory built Kalashnikov from before any U.S. parts needed to be made or anything like that. And they're just a really good gun. And these are actually very undervalued today. A lot of people go looking for the pre-banned Chinese, which are fine too, but a lot of the Hungarian pre-bans kind of get overlooked to the point that they don't sell as much as some of the other pre-ban AKs. So if you're looking for a pre-ban AK, you might see if you can find an FEG SA85M for a good price. The underfolders are more common than the fixed stocks, but you can still find the fixed stocks too if you need them. And these pretty much take standard parts, except for, again, the lower handguard's a little bit different. It's just kind of an interesting collage of some features from the original AK-47 and the AKM. It's worth noting that Hungary never adopted the 545x39 cartridge, so you won't see a AK-74 type variant from them. And again, if you want to look at more Hungarian guns, check out our Hungarian and Russian AK videos that are a couple of years old now. And we'll feature this gun in a shooting video soon, I'm sure, too. I've had it for a couple of years, just never taken it out. Alright, we'll move on. Well, after the AK-47 started to kind of take hold in Europe, Finland actually adopted a highly modified variant itself. Now, Finland did not fall directly under the influence of the Warsaw Pact. However, Russia was always its greatest threat, and Finland has always had a history of kind of taking Russian guns, improving them, and they've always used the same Russian caliber. So it was decided in the early 50s, after Russia had adopted the SKS, RPD, and AK-47, to adopt the 7.62x39 round in Finland. Well, originally they purchased, I assume, some AK-47 Type 3s for basically testing, evaluation, but they did receive an official military designation of RK-54. So using these as a basis, both Seiko and Valmet started work on a Finnish variant in the late 50s, and by 1960, both had a prototype ready to go. Well, it was decided that the Valmet prototype had more potential, so they continued there, and in 1962, the version was adopted as the RK-62, and essentially this was a strengthened version of the original M60 prototype. This here is a 1960s import M62S, which is a semi-automatic version of the RK-62. You've seen it in at least one of our other videos, but it was a few years ago. And this is definitely a substantial AK variant. Starting at the muzzle, we have this very unique tri-fork open-ended flash hider, which is actually pinned to the barrel, not threaded on. I mean, it's threaded and then pinned, I should say. It has a long bayonet lug underneath for a knife-type bayonet. It can also act as a wire cutter. We have a 16-inch barrel. Now this is not chrome lined. They did not chrome line any of these. We have a hooded front sight post, which is adjustable. Gas block is part of the front sight. We've got an exposed ported gas tube, very clearly inspired by the AK-47's ported tube. You've got the sling swivel on the gas block here with a leather sling. We've got these polymer synthetic type cheese grater handguards that are ventilated. We have a milled receiver, but it is a very different milled receiver from an AK-47. It has lightning cuts here and on the other side, also down here. This accepted standard AK type magazines. Originally they were steel mags. The only difference between this and a Polish or Russian was that it has this lanyard loop on the bottom. Later they would use synthetic mags in the 90s. We have a different style trigger guard with a different style mag catch that hangs over to the side, which is easier to catch. And of course a big difference is the rear sight is located on the dust cover. It's still an adjustable ladder style, but it has a peep instead of a notch, and it's of course further back. And they did this to give it a longer sight radius. This dust cover fits tight enough that it doesn't move, at least not for military accuracy. Then we have what is sometimes called a Michelin Man or bicycle type pistol grip. This is polymer overlaid with a steel core, so it's relatively strong. We have a standard AK trigger group. And then finally we have a steel tubular buttstock with a cheek piece on it, polymer cheek piece, so you won't freeze to the stock. And in the very back we have a storage compartment for a cleaning kit, a very long cleaning kit that fits all the way up to the tube. Cleaning rod, and it's in a little bag. Anyway, these went into service. They went into mass production in 1965, and they would manufacture the original RK-62 through 1975, 1976, and of course many are still in service today as they've been refurbished and whatnot. There's a lot of Valmet versions, and we have a blog article on it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. I will say in 1971 the M71 was introduced, which had a stamped receiver, and it has a very typical AKM style features, including rear sights located here and the front sight located at the front of the barrel. Well, it wasn't quite strong enough for snuff, so in 1976 the M76 series came out, which was more of a return to form, but it still had a stamped receiver. there are massive amounts of M76 variants, so you can check those out. Some will have stamped and some will have milled receivers. They were offered in 7.62-39, smallest number, 308, and 223, which is the largest number that was imported. And in 1978, the M78 came out, which was the squad automatic version, similar to an RPK. Finally, there was also the M82, which was a bullpup, but it wasn't very successful, and it was only in 223. In the 90s, Seiko would develop the RK95, which was basically a modernized RK62. It would have a Galil style side folding stock. It would have the ability to mount a scope. It would take a grenade launcher. It would have a gas cutoff gas block, basically just an updated design. Seiko would only make about 20,000 of the RK95s, with production ending in 1998, and they actually dismantled the production line. So the 20,000 RK95s that were made are it. Mostly in service today are the original RK62, with some RK62 76s with the stamped receiver. It's also worth noting that Finland purchased about 100,000 Type 56s from China and 100,000 MPI guns from East Germany. So they did purchase those to supplement. They don't issue them, but they keep them in reserve and for training purposes. But basically the RK62 in various forms, they've updated the handguards, they've updated the pistol grip, is still in service today. When these were imported back in the 60s, this version was only in 7.62-39, so it was not very popular because it was expensive, and that was a very rare cartridge in the US in the 60s and 70s. They only imported about 1,000 to 1,200, and of those, only about 200 had the original military tube stock. The majority had a very nice Arctic birch type wood stock with wood pistol grip. It wasn't until really the M76 came around in 223, a more accessible cartridge, that the Valmet started to become popular. It's also worth noting that the Valmet was the first semi-automatic AK to be imported into the USA, so it has the distinction of being that. But these are extremely neat guns. I've always wanted one. And for more info, check out our blog article and our video on the Valmet RK62 and 6276, or just M76 if you wish. We'll move on. Alright, well, we looked at the Valmet M62, so I thought we would pull a Israeli IMI Galil back out. Now, we have a full-fledged video on this, so I'm not going into a whole lot of detail now and here, but check out the video for several variations and whatnot. But you can definitely see the lineage from the Valmet. It still uses a very similar milled receiver. Still has its rear sight mounted on its dust cover, although this is a simple flip L-type instead of an adjustable ladder. Still a peep though. It has an upswept cocking handle as opposed to straight out like on the Valmet. The gas block, or the gas tube, is very similar, still ported. The gas block is also very similar. See, even the same style of flip-up night sight. Now this takes a NATO standard bayonet as opposed to the Valmet's proprietary. And the original military Galils had an 18-inch barrel, and usually they were either tipped with a birdcage flash hider earlier on or a ported IMI style flash hider. Now this is an ARM, so it has this folding carry handle, these square open-bottomed handguards with a bipod here. Also, the Galil, unlike the Valmet, features a left side selector for the safety, thumb selector. It's not really meant to be an ambidextrous feature, it's meant to be used with the right hand, because if you try to grip it with the left hand, it actually digs into your hand really well. So it's not very left friendly, honestly. And this uses a side folding stock, which actually Seiko would copy later when doing the RK95. It's not an exact copy, but definitely the same inspiration. The stock itself came from the FAL paratrooper and was also used on the FNC. But the Galil has a lot of cues from several guns, but it is a Kalashnikov type action, long stroke gas piston with a 2-lobe rotating bolt. It's chambered for 5.56 NATO as opposed to 7.62 by 39. It feeds from AK style rock-in mags. They hold 35 rounds standard with a 50 round extended also available. And that's about it. You know, Israel developed these in the late 60s and early 70s. They went into service in around 1972, 73, and were standard issue relatively briefly throughout the 70s and through the mid to late 80s. Eventually they were replaced by the M16, Car 15, and M4. On the civilian market, you can find mostly the Century Galani sporter. The earlier ones were built on Ohio rapid-fire receivers, and heat treat is suspect. Some were fine, some weren't, so you need to be careful if you buy an Ohio rapid-fire. The later Galanis were built on Caspian receivers, and these seem to be basically good to go. The Ohio rapid-fire guns will have a GAL prefix to the serial, and the Caspians will have a GLN, so it's a really easy way to tell them apart. You will also find pre-band Galils in the USA. The first ones were imported by Magnum Research and will have an 18-inch barrel. The next run were imported by Action Arms and will mostly have a 16-inch barrel. They actually lobbed off 2 inches to make it less military. By doing that, it could not fire a rifle grenade and it could not take a bayonet. Just one of those import things. And latent import, you'll see some brought over by Springfield, and actually Mossberg would bring over some Galil receivers from Israel. So there's a few different original Israeli stuff. This one here is actually a Reweld done by Tenngalil, Jeff Miller, and original kit. That's why it still has a lightning cut. Most of your pre-bands and whatnot won't have the lightning cut here. But yeah, again, we have a full video on the Galil, but since we just looked at the Valmet, I thought it'd be nice to bring this guy out again and just kind of so you can compare them in your minds. There's definitely a design lineage, although very few parts, if any, are interchangeable. Well, we'll move on. And for our final variant section in today's video, we're going to look at a couple of Bulgarian guns. Now these have also been seen in one of our other videos. It was a live shooting video from a few years ago. In my hands is a semi-automatic SA M7UF for underfolder. And this is essentially a semi-automatic version of a Bulgarian AK-47M1F. Well, like many of the other nations, after Soviet Russia adopted the AK-47 Type 3, Bulgaria began manufacturing a licensed copy at the Arsenal facility, and originally they made exact copies of the original mill gun. However, when most of the rest of the Warsaw Pact went to the stamped AKM, Bulgaria kept on making milled receiver guns, but they would integrate modern features into it. So you'll see some of the Bulgarian guns from the 70s that have AKM type features on a milled receiver. Now they would adopt the AK-74, it would be stamped. They would also adopt the AKS-74U, and it would be stamped, but those were in 545 by 39. In the 80s and early 90s and so on, guns like this one came out that started to have even more modern features taken from the AK-74. So it's kind of an interesting mix. From the muzzle, we have standard 14mm threads with a slant brake, standard AKM type front sight without a bayonet lug. The bayonet lug is on the gas block here, which has the 90-degree port featured on the AK-74. This also has the AKM profile lighter weight barrel. It still takes AK-47 milled type handguards. Originally they would use wood, then they would transition over to this fiberglass, often called Bakelite material, and then later they would go to the black polymer that is very common today. We have a smooth top cover, more like on an AK-47. We have a non-lightning cut bolt carrier. And of course we have a milled receiver, with the major concession to modernity being that the barrel is pressed and pinned in rather than being screwed in. Moving back, we have an AKM style stamped and riveted folding stock, as opposed to the AK-47 machine style on the AKS-47. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You can see the unique taper to the back of the milled receiver because of the underfolding stock. That's taken directly from the AKS-47, this kind of slant cut in the back. Makes a very smooth end piece when done. These took standard magazines, and Bulgaria still offers, or I should say Arsenal still offers, a modernized version of this to this day. I'd like to go into the full history of Arsenal imports into this country because they're very important for the civilian AK shooter, but there's really not enough time to hit up everything. I will start by saying some of the earliest Bulgarian imports were the SA M93, which were essentially milled Type 3 guns brought in after the 1989 import ban. So they would have thumbhole stocks, and they would have their bayonet lugs machined off and some other modifications, but they were, basically rebuilds of original AK-47 Type 3s. Later, you would have the SLR-95 and the SLR-101, which were more modernized versions that were imported with thumbhole stocks, and they would take low-cap magazines, 10-round, single-stack type mags. And then Arsenal would start making guns in the USA, first using the nomenclature SA space M7. Later, and these were all milled, later they would start using SA M7 altogether as a designator for guns imported from Bulgaria. They would start importing milled guns from Bulgaria around 2011 again, but this time, instead of leaving them in their import neutered state, they would fully flush them out like this one, giving it 14mm threads, removable muzzle device, bayonet lug, ability to feed from standard AK magazines, and pistol grip, and standard military buttstocks. They also have done a stamped line under the SLR name, which appeared around 2006. The SLR-107 was in 7.62x39. The SLR-106 was in 5.56. Originally, the SLR-105 was a fixed stock, 5.45, and then later the SLR-104 replaced it around 2013, 2014 as the side folding version. But anyway, you can actually see the NSLR-104FR in the first part of this video, because it's an exact copy of a Russian AKS-74. But with their mill guns, like this one, it's pretty much all Bulgarian. You have a Bulgarian forged machined receiver. You have a Bulgarian cold hammer forged chrome line barrel. Fit and finish is very nice. And these are very close copies of what they offer to militaries and other buyers of full auto guns around the world. These guns have very smooth bolts, and they have very nice double hook forged triggers. Very nice. The stock is also very stable with no play to speak of. So this is a Bulgarian SAM7 UF. Another modern import that Arsenal is offering is the SAM7SF. And what the SAM7SF is a civilian semi-automatic only version of their current military issue and offered AR M1F. Now they make this in several different variations too. So mostly different stocks or different muzzle devices or different handguards, different furniture, but the core rifle is the same. Like the UF, this has a machined forged Bulgarian receiver, smooth top cover. Like the Galil you just looked at, it just has a left side selector, thumb selector. So that's kind of neat for safety. We also have a scope rail here, standard for attaching optics. This sling swivel rotates 360. This pistol grip is a little bit larger and more ergonomic. Now we have this unique side folding stock. The mechanism is very similar to the one used by the Russians in the AKS-74 and AK-74M, but instead of folding to the left, it folds to the right. Here. And the latch is similar, but instead of being inside to flick it, it's on the outside. And as you notice, this has a longer pull. This stock isn't too heavy because it's hollow steel. It has a rubber recoil pad, not much, but it keeps it from, not so much dampening recoil, but it keeps it on your shoulder from slipping off, which is nice. Now you do have this block hanging off the back of the receiver where the folding mechanism is, and this is correct. This is how the Bulgarian military guns are. It does give it a longer length to pull, which some people will like and some won't. It's just one of those things. Just like the UF, this has a very smooth bolt with a very nice trigger. This is a modern waffle pattern Circle 10 magazine, which is appropriate for these. These are the modern handguards with heat shield inside. The gas block is the same. The front sight base now has a bayonet lug on it. This has 24 millimeter threads as opposed to 14, and this is what is often called an egg beater type flash hider that sometimes gets used on these, which is kind of neat. Unique Bulgarian. It'll take the standard AK-74 muzzle brake as well. But originally, Arsenal would manufacture these in the USA, or I should say assemble these in the USA from existing parts kits on imported Bulgarian receivers finished out here around 2005, but they were very expensive. They were around $1,800 then, and then after they quit making them, they would shoot up to over $2,000. So when these came out in 2013 as true Bulgarian imports built over there, and they were selling for about $1,300. Still a lot of money, but it was a lot cheaper than the earlier U.S. made ones. And this is current issue with a few differences from the earlier ones. A few minor differences, but they are noticeable. But yeah, this is a semi-automatic version of the Bulgarian AR M1F. They also do this with a solid body side folding stock for military use, and they have different underfolding versions, and they have ones with flashlights integrated into the handguard. There's a whole series, M4, M7, M9. This one is in 7.62 by 39. They also do some in 5.56 NATO. They do not do these in 5.45 because Bulgaria hasn't used that cartridge for 20 years. But Arsenals are good guns for being pretty much the best things since the pre-ban era if you're a military collector or like military pattern guns. They're built over there, they have the minimum number of US parts required, and Arsenal goes to some good, great pains to keep military features purely intact. Also, the markings are minimized and not egregious, and they're just really good guns. They shoot well, they're durable, and they don't import these in huge numbers, so they hold their value quite well. My first milled Arsenal I bought in 2005, and I paid $600 new for it. I sold it in 2010 used for $950, so I consider that a good deal. I made a little money and got to enjoy a gun for 4 years. But yeah, no AK variants collection would be complete without Arsenals, and they are definitely top tier AKs as far as that goes, without being custom. And today you can still buy both of these, and they're still right in the $1,200 to $1,300 range. And with modern prices for Wassers, $750 and up, the Arsenal's pretty much held steady the last few years, whereas other guns have gone up. So just something worth considering. Well, we'll do a second section featuring more variants, so look forward to that. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them below, and we'll do our best to help. As always, this is Misha, and thanks for tuning in.